The raffle ticket trembled between my fingers as Dr. Stevens called out the winning numbers. One by one, they matched mine, each digit a tiny explosion in my chest. When he announced I'd won the luxury Napa Valley getaway, I couldn't stop grinning. 2 nights at the Golden Valley Resort, wine tastings, spa treatments, everything Brandon and I desperately needed. Congratulations, Joy. My coworker Adam clapped me on the back. About time something good happened around here. I clutched the golden envelope to my chest, already imagining Brandon's face when I surprised him. We hadn't taken a real vacation since our honeymoon 3 years ago. Between his demanding sales job and his mother's constant emergencies, we barely had time for date nights anymore. He's going to flip, I said, more to myself than Adam. In a good way, I hope. Adam's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He'd heard enough of my marriage troubles over lunch breaks to fill a therapy session. I rushed home early, stopping to pick up Brandon's favorite takeout and a bottle of champagne. The house was quiet when I walked in. No mother-in-law camping on our couch or calling with her latest crisis. Perfect. Brandon came home late, as usual. His tie was loose, dark circles under his eyes. "Hey, babe," he mumbled, barely looking up from his phone. "I have amazing news." I set out the food, poured champagne. "Remember that company raffle?" He glanced up briefly. "The charity thing? I won. 2 nights at Golden Valley Resort in Napa, all expenses paid. Just you and me, next weekend." I held out the envelope like an offering. Brandon's fingers froze on his phone. "Next weekend? Yes, isn't it perfect? We can finally have that romantic getaway we've been talking about." He set his phone down slowly. "Joy, Mom's having her knee surgery next weekend. I told you I needed to be there for her recovery." The champagne bubbles turned sour in my stomach. "That's just a minor outpatient procedure. The doctor said she'd be fine in a day." "She needs me there. You know how she gets anxious about medical stuff since Dad died." "She has a whole church group ready to help her. And Tom—" "Don't bring up Tom." Brandon's voice hardened. "He abandoned her. I won't do the same thing." I took a deep breath. What if you took her instead of me?" The words felt like betrayal in my mouth, but I had to know. Brandon's face lit up. "That's perfect. Mom would love it. She's always wanted to visit wine country." The room spun slightly. "I was joking, Brandon. The prize is for couples. I won it. I want to go with my husband." "Don't be selfish, Joy. Mom needs this more than we do. She's been so lonely lately." "Selfish?" The word hit like a slap. "I'm selfish for wanting 2 days alone with my husband?" Brandon stood up, food untouched. "If you can't understand how much Mom needs me right now, maybe we need to rethink some things." "What things?" "This marriage, our priorities." He grabbed his keys. "I'm going to check on Mom. Don't wait up." The front door slammed, leaving me alone with cooling takeout and flat champagne. My phone buzzed. A text from Grace. "How'd he take the news?" I stared at the golden envelope, now crumpled in my fist. 3 years of putting Linda first. 3 years of canceled dates and interrupted moments. 3 years of watching my marriage dissolve into a twisted threesome I never signed up for. My fingers flew across the phone. "You free for coffee? I need to talk about revenge." Grace stirred her coffee with calculated precision, her eyes fixed on me across the diner booth. "He actually suggested taking his mother instead of you?" I pushed my untouched eggs around the plate. "You know what kills me? 5 years ago, Brandon would have never done this. Remember our wedding? He actually told Linda to back off when she tried to plan the whole thing herself." "I remember." "What changed?" The question hung between us like smoke. My mind drifted to our first anniversary when Brandon surprised me with a weekend in Seattle. We made it halfway there before Linda called, claiming chest pains. By the time we got to the emergency room, she was chatting with nurses about their children. Nothing wrong with her heart, just a panic attack, they said. "Everything changed after his father died," I said. "It's like Brandon's terrified of losing her too." Grace's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then her eyes widened. "Speaking of Linda, isn't that her?" I turned. Through the diner's front window, I watched my mother-in-law stride into the boutique across the street, looking remarkably spry for someone facing knee surgery next week. "Let's follow her," Grace said, already reaching for her purse. "What? No, that's exactly what we're doing." She threw down cash for our breakfast. Come on, Nancy Drew. We crossed the street, ducking into the boutique. Linda stood at a rack of designer dresses, holding up a sequined number that cost more than my monthly car payment. Can you believe Brandon? She was saying into her phone. Trying to waste that lovely prize on Joy when he knows I've always wanted to see wine country? Yes, I know the knee thing was last minute, but it worked, didn't it? My stomach clenched. Grace grabbed my arm, steadying me. Of course I feel bad, Linda continued, but what choice do I have? Ever since his father died, I've had to get creative to keep him close. You should have seen how he used to be with her, Sarah. Like I didn't even exist. The dress slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Linda spun around. Our eyes met. I'll call you back, she said quickly, ending the call. Her face transformed, concern replacing calculation. Joy, what a surprise. I was just looking for something to wear after my surgery. Funny, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. I thought you'd be resting that knee. Oh, the doctor said light activity is good for circulation. She smiled, but her eyes darted toward the exit. I should get going. So much to do before next week. Like planning your wine tour? The color drained from her face. I don't know what you think you heard. I heard enough. I stepped closer. You're not having surgery at all, are you? Now, Joy, don't jump to conclusions. Brandon wouldn't like... Brandon isn't here. My voice dropped lower. But I am, and I heard everything. Linda's facade cracked. You don't understand. After Robert died, Brandon was all I had left. Then you came along, and suddenly he had someone else to care about. Do you know what that's like? To watch someone you love choose someone else? Yeah, Linda, I do. She reached for my arm. I stepped back. Please don't tell him, she whispered. He wouldn't understand. Grace appeared at my side, phone in hand. Too late, I recorded everything. Linda's eyes narrowed. You wouldn't dare. I thought about Brandon, about our ruined Seattle trip, about countless dinners interrupted by his mother's emergencies, about the way he looked at me last night, choosing her over me without hesitation. You're right, I said. I won't tell him? Yet. But that Napa trip, it's staying mine. And if you try to interfere, Brandon will hear exactly how creative you've gotten at keeping him close. I turned and walked out, Grace beside me, leaving Linda clutching her designer dress like a shield. Outside, my hands shook as I gulped the cool morning air. That was badass, Grace said softly. What now? I watched Linda hurry out of the boutique, phone already pressed to her ear. Now we start planning that trip to Napa, and this time, I'm not taking no for an answer. The bank statement trembled in my hands as I stared at the series of transfers. $2,000 last month, $1,500 the month before, all to an account I didn't recognize. Our savings had been hemorrhaging money for months, and I'd finally discovered why. I called the bank. 5 minutes later, I had my answer. The account belonged to Linda Parker. The front door clicked open. Brandon walked in, whistling. He froze when he saw me at the kitchen table, papers spread out like evidence at a crime scene. You're home early, he said. Funny thing about that. I held up the statement. I had to leave work when the mortgage company called. Apparently, we're 2 months behind on payments. The whistle died on his lips. I can explain. Please do. Explain why you've been sending thousands to your mother while we default on our house. She needed help with medical bills. What medical bills, Brandon? The fake knee surgery? The words shot out before I could stop them. His face darkened. What are you talking about? I saw her yesterday, shopping for designer dresses, strutting around like a runway model. Some knee problem. You're spying on my mother now? No, I'm discovering how deep her manipulation goes. And yours. Brandon slumped into a chair. It's not what you think. After Dad died, after your father died, you became her emotional husband. I get it. But stealing from our future? That's crossing a line. I didn't steal anything. It's our money. Our money? When was the last time you consulted me about our money? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. My phone buzzed. A text from Grace. Found Tom's number. Want it? Brandon noticed my expression change. Who's that? Your brother. He shot up from his chair. Stay away from Tom. He doesn't understand our family. Maybe he understands more than you think. I stood, gathering the bank statements. I'm going to Grace's tonight. Don't wait up. Joy, wait. He grabbed my arm. Mom needs us. She's all alone. And whose fault is that? I yanked free. Did you ever wonder why Tom left? Why your father spent so much time at work? Why I'm leaving right now? You're not leaving. We can fix this. Can we? Because from where I'm standing, there are 3 people in this marriage, and I'm the only one being honest. I walked out, my heart hammering. In my car, I texted Grace back. Send Tom's number. Time to hear the other side of this story. An hour later, I sat across from Tom Parker in a quiet bar on the edge of town. He looked like Brandon, but harder, weathered by years of choosing freedom over family obligation. So, he said, studying his whiskey, little brother's following in mother's footsteps. What do you mean? The money thing. It's how she controlled Dad, too. Emotional blackmail backed by financial manipulation. She'd spend recklessly, then cry about bills until he gave in. When he finally stood up to her, he trailed off. What happened? Heart attack at 55. Stress, the doctor said, but I knew better. Tom's knuckles whitened around his glass. Brandon was always her favorite, more pliable. After Dad died, I tried to warn him. He chose her side. Haven't spoken since. My phone lit up with Brandon's 10th message. Please come home. We can work this out. You know what the worst part is? Tom continued. She's not evil. She's just empty. Nothing's ever enough. Not Dad's love, not my independence, not Brandon's devotion. And now, not your marriage. How did you break free? He smiled grimly. I realized something. Sometimes loving someone means walking away, letting them face the consequences of their choices. I thought about the Napa tickets sitting in my purse, about Brandon's ultimatum, about years of putting Linda first. I have an idea, I said slowly, but I'll need your help. Tom leaned forward. I'm listening. It's time for a family reunion, one that forces everyone to face the truth, even if it breaks us all. 3 days at Grace's house turned into a week. Brandon's calls became less frequent, his messages shorter. Each one ended the same way. Mom needs me, never I need you, or come home. I threw myself into work, but even there, I couldn't escape. Adam caught me crying in the break room, staring at an old photo on my phone. Brandon and me in Seattle before we turned back. You look different there, Adam said, sliding a coffee across the table. Happy? I tried to smile. Real? He hesitated. Listen, there's something you should know. I overheard Brandon on a call yesterday during the client meeting. My stomach tightened. Brandon hadn't mentioned any meeting. He was talking about selling stocks, Adam continued. Something about needing quick cash for a down payment. Down payment? The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. What down payment? On a condo, for his mother. The mug slipped from my hands, shattering against the floor. Coffee spread like blood across the tiles. Joy, I have to go. I grabbed my purse, leaving the mess behind. 20 minutes later, I sat in our investment advisor's office, watching him pull up our accounts. The numbers confirmed my worst fears. Brandon had liquidated almost everything. The transfer started 3 months ago, the advisor explained. Mr. Parker said you were both aware. We weren't both anything. I stood up, the room spinning slightly. Thank you for your time. Outside, I called Tom. Did you know about the condo? What condo? The one your brother's buying for Linda, with our retirement funds. Silence crackled across the line. Then, meet me at Murphy's, now. At the bar, Tom nursed a scotch while I paced. She did this before, he said finally, right before Dad died. Convinced him to buy her a vacation house in Florida. Said she needed somewhere to heal after her imaginary cancer scare. Cancer scare? One of her greatest hits. Lasted 6 months. Miraculous recovery, of course. He laughed bitterly. Dad died before the closing. Heart attack, remember? The stress of refinancing everything. My phone buzzed. Brandon again. This time, I answered. Where are you? His voice was tight. Mom's worried sick. Is she, or is she too busy condo shopping? The line went quiet. Who told you? Does it matter? Were you going to tell me before or after you emptied our accounts? You don't understand? No, you don't understand. I just left our investment advisor's office. You didn't just take our savings, Brandon. You took our future. Mom needs security after everything she's been through. Everything she's been through? My voice rose. What about what she's put us through? What about what she did to your father? Don't bring him into this. Why not? Because you might realize you're following his footsteps right into an early grave. Tom flinched beside me. I'm doing what's right, Brandon said. If you can't support that? If I can't support that, what? You'll leave me? Newsflash, Brandon. You left this marriage a long time ago. I just didn't want to admit it. I hung up before he could respond. Tom watched me carefully. What now? He asked. My phone lit up with a text from Grace. Found you an apartment, 3-month lease available immediately. Another message popped up, this one from Linda. Please don't destroy my family. Brandon needs me. I stared at the words, feeling something shift inside me. Not sadness anymore, not even anger. Something colder, more focused. Now? I looked at Tom. Now we stop playing defense. You said Linda had a miracle recovery from her cancer scare? He nodded slowly. I bet there are medical records, or rather, a lack of them. Records that might interest Brandon's therapist or his lawyer. Joy, she wants to play games with people's lives? Fine, but I'm done being a pawn. I stood up, steadier than I'd felt in weeks. It's time to show Linda what happens when you push someone too far. Tom's expression darkened with recognition. You sound like Dad, right before the end. Good, I said, reaching for my keys. Because this is the end, just not the one Linda's expecting. The hospital records lay scattered across Grace's dining room table like pieces of a twisted puzzle. Tom's contact at County General had come through. Every medical file for Linda Parker over the past decade. Nothing, Grace said, shuffling through papers. No cancer screenings, no serious illnesses, just routine checkups and... She paused, frowning at a document. What? Psychiatric referrals, lots of them, all declined. My phone buzzed. Brandon. Coming home tonight, we need to talk about the condo. I ignored it, focusing on the papers. Look at these dates. The first referral was right after your father died, I said to Tom. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. 2 weeks before she claimed she found the lump. The imaginary lump that convinced your father to buy that house. And nearly bankrupted him doing it? Tom's jaw tightened. History repeating itself. Grace's doorbell rang. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Linda's silver Mercedes. Perfect timing, I muttered, grabbing the files. Let's see how she handles her own medical history. But when Grace opened the door, it wasn't Linda who stepped inside. It was Brandon. Mom's in the car, he said quickly. She doesn't know I'm here. His eyes locked onto the papers in my hands. What are those? Your mother's greatest performances. I held up a psychiatric referral. Tell me, did she ever mention these? You had no right. Like you had no right to drain our accounts? I stepped closer. Your father died because of her games, Brandon. And you're following the same path. Dad died of a heart attack. After months of financial stress and emotional manipulation. Just like what she's doing to you now. Brandon's face flushed. The condo is an investment? It's a trap, just like the Florida house was for your father, just like this marriage has become for me. Joy, I'm going to Napa next weekend, I cut him off. With or without you, but first you need to see something. I handed him the psychiatric referrals. His hands trembled as he read. Multiple recommendations for treatment of factitious disorder, he mumbled. Tendency to fabricate medical conditions for attention and control. A car horn blared outside, Linda growing impatient. She needs help, Brandon. Real help, not enabling. He looked up, tears in his eyes. What am I supposed to do? Choose. Right now. Stay here. Read these files, face the truth, or go back to that car and keep pretending. The horn sounded again, longer this time. She's waiting, I said softly. Brandon stared at the papers, then at me. For a moment, I saw a glimmer of the man I'd married. strong, independent, capable of standing up to his mother's manipulation. Then his phone buzzed. Linda's text lit up the screen. "I'm feeling dizzy. Please hurry." Just like that, the glimmer vanished. He set the papers down. "I can't leave her alone like this." "Like what? Perfectly healthy but desperate for attention?" "You don't understand." "No, you don't understand. This ends now. Either you stay and face reality or I'm done. And I'm taking everything we have left to court." Brandon stepped back, shaking his head. "You wouldn't." "Try me. I've got 3 years of financial records and a stack of medical files that prove elder abuse by proxy. How do you think a judge will view that?" The horn blared a third time. Brandon looked at the door, then back at me. "I'm sorry," he whispered and walked out. I watched through the window as he got into the Mercedes. As they drove away, Tom placed a hand on my shoulder. "Now what?" I picked up my phone, dialing my lawyer's number. "Now we do this my way. Book your ticket to Napa, Tom. It's time for that family reunion we discussed." "Joy," Grace warned. "Revenge won't fix this." "This isn't about revenge anymore." I watched the Mercedes disappear around the corner. "It's about survival, and I'm done being the victim in Linda Parker's tragedy." The Napa Valley sunset painted everything gold, but I felt nothing but cold as I watched Brandon's car pull into the resort parking lot. Linda sat in the passenger seat, exactly where I should have been. "Right on schedule," Tom muttered beside me. "Mom never could resist crashing a party." I clutched the envelope containing the medical records. "Did you send the anonymous tip?" "Called the front desk an hour ago. They think she's here for a surprise anniversary celebration." Brandon helped Linda out of the car, her movements deliberately slow and fragile. The same act she'd perfected during her cancer scare, now recycled for a new audience. "Show time," I whispered, stepping into view. Brandon froze. Linda's hand flew to her chest, her signature move when feeling faint. "Joy?" Brandon's voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" "Enjoying my prize. The question is, what are you doing here, with her?" Linda swayed dramatically. "Brandon, I'm feeling dizzy." "Drop the act, Linda." Tom emerged from the shadows. "We've seen this performance before." The color drained from Linda's face. "Tom, Brandon, what's happening?" "That's what I'd like to know." Brandon looked between us, lost. "Why are you both?" "Because someone needs to stop this." I opened the envelope. "Remember these, Linda? The psychiatric referrals you ignored? The ones from right before Robert's death?" Linda straightened, her fragility act forgotten. "Those are private." "Like the private accounts Brandon's been funding? Or the private conversations about the condo?" "Joy, please." Brandon stepped forward. "This isn't the place." "It's exactly the place. Where else could I get you both away from your carefully constructed reality?" "You're making a scene," Linda hissed. "No, I'm making a point." I turned to Brandon. "Your father died because of her manipulation. Tom left because he couldn't take it anymore. And now you're throwing away our marriage for what? Another of her fabricated emergencies?" Brandon's phone buzzed. Probably the front desk about the surprise celebration. He ignored it, staring at the medical files in my hands. "Mom?" His voice was small, uncertain. "What are they talking about?" Linda's mask cracked. "They're trying to turn you against me, just like Tom did. Just like your father." "Don't you dare mention Dad," Tom snapped. "You killed him with your games." "I loved him." "You consumed him," I corrected. "Like you're consuming Brandon." Brandon stepped back, shaking his head. "This isn't... I can't..." "Choose Brandon," I said quietly. "Right here, right now. Your mother's lies or the truth." Linda grabbed his arm. "I'm your mother. I need you..." "No," I cut in. "You want him. There's a difference." Brandon looked at the files, at his brother, at me. For a moment, I saw clarity in his eyes. Then Linda collapsed. Not her usual delicate swoon, but a full theatrical fall. Brandon caught her automatically, years of conditioning taking over. "Mom! Mom! Call an ambulance!" Linda gasped. My heart... I watched Brandon transform back into the dutiful son, all clarity vanishing as he cradled his mother. Tom's hand found my shoulder. "Joy, don't..." I stepped back, something breaking inside me. I'm done. Brandon looked up, torn. Joy, please, I have to. Take care of her, I know. I dropped the medical files at his feet. You always do. Linda's eyes met mine through her performance, triumphant. She'd won again. I turned away, my carefully planned confrontation crumbling like sand. Behind me, I heard Brandon calling for help. Linda's theatrical moans, Tom's disgusted sigh. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with a text from Grace. How did it go? I watched the golden sunset fade to purple, thinking of all the years I'd wasted fighting a battle that was rigged from the start. Some people don't want to be saved from their demons. Sometimes they prefer the familiar chains to uncertain freedom. It's over, I typed back. Time to let go. The ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, a fitting soundtrack to the death of my marriage. I walked away from the scene, leaving Brandon to his chosen fate. Behind me, Linda's performance reached its crescendo, but I didn't look back. Some victories only come through surrender. The emergency room buzzed with fluorescent intensity as I strode past the nurse's station. Linda's latest performance had landed her in the cardiac ward, though her preliminary tests showed nothing wrong. Of course. I found her alone in room 412, Brandon presumably off fetching her another blanket or ice chip or whatever else she'd demanded. She looked smaller in the hospital bed, more vulnerable, but her eyes were sharp as ever when they met mine. Come to gloat, she asked. No, I came to give you this. I placed a worn leather journal on her bedside table. Found it in Robert's old briefcase. Tom kept it all these years. Linda's hand trembled as she reached for it. Robert's diary? His suicide note, essentially. Every manipulation, every fake illness, every financial drain, he documented it all. Right up until the day his heart gave out. She withdrew her hand as if burned. You're lying. Read it yourself. Page 47 is particularly interesting. The day you first mentioned that non-existent lump. The hospital machinery beeped steadily as Linda stared at the journal. You don't understand what it's like, she whispered, to watch your children slip away, to feel yourself becoming unnecessary. So you make yourself necessary through lies? Through emotional blackmail? I keep my family close. You keep them trapped, and now you're doing it to Brandon. She lifted her chin. Brandon loves me. Brandon fears you. There's a difference. I moved closer. But here's what you should fear. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. I'm taking what's left of our money, all traceable to your fake emergencies. And this journal, copies are going to Brandon's therapist and lawyer. He'll never believe. Maybe not at first, but seeds of doubt are funny things. They grow. Just ask Tom. Footsteps approached, Brandon returning. Linda's face contorted with panic. What do you want? She hissed. Get help, real help, the kind those psychiatric referrals suggested years ago, or I'll make sure Brandon sees exactly what happened to his father. Brandon appeared in the doorway, clutching a cup of ice chips. He froze, looking between us. Everything okay? He asked cautiously. I turned to leave, but Linda's voice stopped me. Wait. She was crying now, real tears this time. Brandon, there's something I need to tell you. I watched the scene unfold, Linda confessing to her lies, Brandon's face crumpling as she described the years of manipulation. The truth about his father's death, the fabricated illnesses, the financial destruction. I couldn't bear to lose you too, she finished. Brandon sat heavily in the visitor's chair, his world reshaping itself around this new reality. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. All this time, I'm sorry, Linda whispered. I'll get help. I promise. Just don't leave me alone. Brandon looked at me, then back at his mother. I saw the choice weighing on him, the same choice his father never got to make. You won't be alone, Mom, he said finally, but you need help, professional help, and I need time. He stood up, shoulders straight for the first time in years. Joy, I'll be at Grace's, I said softly, when you're ready to talk. Linda called out as I reached the door. I really am sorry, for everything. I turned back one last time. I know, that's why I brought the journal instead of sending it straight to Brandon. Everyone deserves one chance to choose truth over lies. In the hallway, Tom waited by the elevator. "How'd it go?" "Better than revenge," I said. "She's finally facing herself." "And Brandon?" I watched through the window as Brandon held his mother's hand, both of them crying now, not from manipulation, but from truth. "He's facing himself too. Sometimes that's the hardest battle of all." The elevator doors opened. As we stepped in, I heard Linda ask for her psychiatrist referral papers. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in destroying your enemy, but in helping them find their way back to humanity, even if that means letting go of your own need for revenge. The Italian sun warmed my face as I sipped espresso at the small cafe in Florence. Grace had insisted on this trip. Healing through carbs, she called it. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom, a photo of Linda at her therapy session. Actually showing up this time. Progress, however small. "Another postcard?" Grace nodded at the blank card on our table. "Last one. I'd been writing them throughout our trip, not to send, but to say the things I needed to say. This one was for Brandon." The waiter brought our bill just as my phone buzzed again. Brandon's name lit up the screen, his first contact since signing the divorce papers 3 weeks ago. "The condo sale went through," his message read, "using the money for Mom's treatment instead." I set the phone down, letting the weight of those words settle. No accusations, no guilt trips, just truth. The one thing that had been missing from our marriage for so long. "You okay?" Grace asked. "Better than okay." I picked up my pen, finally knowing what to write on that last postcard. Not about revenge or justice or even forgiveness. Something simpler, more honest. A shadow fell across our table. I looked up to find Adam, his familiar pragmatic smile somehow softer in the Tuscan light. "Fancy meeting you here," he said. Grace's eyes widened. "Did you—" "I might have mentioned our itinerary to him," I admitted. Sometimes the best way forward is with someone who saw you clearly all along. Adam pulled up a chair, ordered an espresso in surprisingly decent Italian. We talked about everything and nothing. Work, travel, the way life surprises you when you stop trying to control it. My phone buzzed one more time, a message from Linda. "Thank you for the journal, for giving me a chance to choose differently. I thought about revenge, about how I'd wanted to destroy her, to make her feel as trapped as I had. But in the end, the greatest victory wasn't in tearing someone down. It was in finding the strength to walk away, to let them face their own demons while you face your future." "There's this little vineyard in Chianti," Adam said, his knee brushing mine under the table. "If you're interested." Grace kicked me softly, grinning. I looked at the postcard, still blank except for Brandon's name. What do you say to someone who is both your greatest love and your hardest lesson? In the end, I wrote just 3 words. Choose yourself first. The waiter returned with Adam's coffee, asking if we needed anything else. I caught my reflection in the window, no longer the woman who'd won that Napa Valley trip, desperate to save a marriage that was already gone. Someone stronger now. Someone who understood that sometimes the happy ending isn't about winning or losing, but about finding the courage to write your own story. "Actually," I said, both to the waiter and to whatever twist of fate had brought me here, "we'll take another round. We're celebrating." "What are we celebrating?" Adam asked. I tucked the postcard into my bag, unsigned. Some words don't need to be sent to be heard. "New chapters," I said, raising my cup. "And the art of letting go." Grace and Adam lifted their cups too, the afternoon sun turning everything to gold. Somewhere back home, Brandon was learning to set boundaries, Linda was facing her fears in therapy, and Tom was rebuilding bridges he'd thought forever burned. And here, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be. Not because I'd won or lost, but because I'd finally understood that the greatest act of revenge against a life that's trapped you is to simply set yourself free. The espresso was bitter and perfect on my tongue, tasting like truth, like possibility, like the kind of peace that comes not from victory, but from finally, completely, letting go.
Life's funny, you know? You start off with a heart full of dreams and a head full of plans, thinking you've got it all figured out. That was me, Jane, and my husband Alex when we first tied the knot. We were like 2 peas in a pod, living in this cozy house I got from my granny, with our little bundle of joy, Lily lighting up our world. Back then, Alex had just opened up his bakery. It was small, but it was his pride and joy. I was climbing the ladder at the company, crunching numbers as an economist. We were a team dreaming big dreams about big houses and college funds for Lily, and maybe a sibling or two down the line. But as the months rolled by, something shifted. The bakery remained small, barely scraping by. I tried talking to Alex about maybe expanding or trying something new to boost business. Alex, babe, have you thought about maybe offering catering services? Or what about those pastry classes you always wanted to run? I'd suggest, trying to keep the conversation light and positive. He just waved me off, his forehead creasing in annoyance. Jane, I know what I'm doing, okay? We're fine as we are, he'd say, but we weren't fine. Not really. I started taking on more hours at work, trying to make up for the shortfall. It was around then that things with Alex's mom got tense too. She'd call out of the blue, laying into me about how I wasn't supporting Alex enough. Listen here, Jane, she'd hiss over the phone. My son doesn't need your charity. He's doing just fine without your meddling. I was taken aback, to say the least. Mrs. Thompson, I'm just trying to help. We're family, aren't we? And besides, I'm not exactly sitting on a pile of cash here. I'm working hard for everything we have, I'd explain. Lately, things have been going south for Alex's bakery, like a ship hitting one iceberg after another. First, he had to let go of half the staff, which was tough. Those were people we knew, people who relied on that paycheck. Then he had to cut down on production, saying there wasn't enough demand to keep things running like before. It broke my heart to see him so defeated, but I wasn't about to sit back and watch our dreams crumble to dust. One evening, I sat down with him, trying to keep the conversation as light as possible. Alex, love, have you thought about maybe bringing someone in, a consultant or something, to look at what's going wrong and help us fix it? He barely looked up from his plate, his fork playing with his food more than anything. Jane, we've been over this. I don't need some outsider telling me how to run my bakery, he'd say. But it could help, don't you think? Maybe there's something we're missing. We could even consider a loan, just to tide things over and invest in a bit of a revamp. That got his attention. His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. A loan? Are you out of your mind? We're already hanging by a thread, Jane, and now you want us to drown in debt? I tried to keep my voice calm, even though frustration was bubbling inside me. It's not drowning if it helps us swim, Alex. I'm just trying to find a way to help us get through this, I'd say. But he slammed his fork down, pushing away from the table. No, Jane, just no, he'd say, storming out, leaving me sitting there, staring at his uneaten dinner. A few months passed, and the bakery's front door had a new sign hanging on it. Closed until further notice. It was like a punch to the gut every time I walked past it. Inside our home, the air was thick with unspoken words and frustration. Alex had retreated into himself, spending days on end flipping through job listings with a scowl, his pride bruised and battered. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found Alex slumped on the couch, the glow of the TV casting shadows across his face. Alex, we need to talk about you finding a job, I started, trying to keep my voice steady and calm. He didn't even look up. I'm looking, Jane. Looking, he'd say, but looking or scrolling through social media wasn't bringing in income. Not just whatever this is. I couldn't help but let a bit of sarcasm slip. Finally, he looked at me, his face set in a stubborn line. I told you, I'm not settling for some entry-level crap. I have a degree, Jane. I was a businessman. I'm not going to be someone's lackey, Alex snapped back. Your business failed, Alex, I reminded him, a little more harshly than I intended. We can't afford your pride right now. We need practical solutions, real income. That set him off. So what? You think I'm just a failure? Is that it? You don't think I can make it back to the top? It's not about what I think, I tried to reason. It's about reality. We have bills, a daughter to think about. He didn't let me finish. Forget it, Jane. You wouldn't understand. You're just like everyone else, trying to keep me down. The argument spiraled from there. harsh words thrown back and forth until he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Not long after that mess, his mother called. As soon as I heard her voice, I braced myself. "Jane, you need to do something about getting Alex a job at your place." "A good one," she demanded, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "Mrs. Thompson, it doesn't work like that," I started, feeling the frustration building. "They don't just hand out high positions based on a request, especially not to someone with no experience in the field." She huffed. "You need to support your husband more, Jane. He's got potential. You're just holding him back." The conversation went in circles, her accusing me of not doing enough, of not caring enough, while I tried to explain the reality of our situation. It ended with her hanging up on me, leaving me feeling even more isolated and frustrated. And so, days turned into weeks with Alex barely lifting a finger around the house, consumed with his phone or the TV, leaving me to juggle work, household chores, and taking care of Lily. Every attempt to talk to him about responsibilities, about being a part of this family, was met with defensiveness or outright avoidance. "Can you at least pick up Lily from school today?" I asked one morning, hoping for a small win. "I'm busy, Jane," was his dismissive reply, not even specifying what he was busy with. "Doing what, Alex? What's so important that you can't help with your daughter?" I pressed, but he just shrugged. "Just stuff you wouldn't get," he said, wrapped up in his own world. That's how it was now, him wrapped up in his world of whatever, me trying to keep everything else from falling apart. Every conversation a battle, every day a little harder than the last. Things between Alex and me hadn't been great, but I never expected to find out he was taking cash right out of my purse. It started small, a $20 here, a $50 there. I thought I was being forgetful at first, until one day the missing amounts were too big to ignore. I waited for Alex to come home, tapping my foot, my arms crossed. The minute he walked through the door, I was on him like a hawk. "Alex, we need to talk. Now," I said, my voice sharp. "The cash from my purse. It's been going missing, and I want to know why," I demanded. For a moment, he tried to play dumb, his eyes shifting away from mine. "Money? What are you talking about, Jane? Don't play games with me," he said. "I've been noticing for weeks. It's gone, and you're the only other person here," I insisted. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Okay, I took it. But Jane, you don't understand. I needed it." "Needed it for what, Alex? Beer? Because that's all." "I see what you're doing these days. Sitting around drinking while I'm out working my ass off," I confronted him. He flinched at that, but anger quickly replaced the guilt in his eyes. "I don't have to explain myself to you, Jane. It's not like I'm asking for much, just a little cash to get by." "Get by?" I was incredulous. "While I'm juggling bills, trying to keep us afloat. That money wasn't yours to take, Alex. That's stealing." His face turned red, and he took a step towards me, his voice raising. "Stealing, really, Jane? From my own wife? That's what you're going to call it?" "Yes, that's exactly what I'm calling it." I stood firm. "Because that's what it is, Alex. You took something that wasn't yours without asking. What else would you call it?" We stood there glaring at each other, the tension thick in the air. It felt like a chasm had opened up between us, one filled with betrayal and hurt. Before I could say anything else, his phone rang. He glanced at it and then stormed off into the other room, leaving me standing there, fuming and heartbroken. The next day, things went from bad to worse. Alex's mom called, and before I could even get a word in, she was ripping into me. "Jane, you ungrateful little witch. How dare you accuse my son of stealing? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I pressed the phone against my ear, her shrill voice making my head pound. "Mrs. Thompson, he took money from me. What was I supposed to do? Just ignore it?" "That's exactly what you should have done. He's your husband, for God's sake. You're supposed to support each other," she retorted. "Support doesn't mean turning a blind eye to problems, Mrs. Thompson. It means facing them together. But how can we do that when he's lying and taking money behind my back?" I argued. You've always been too hard on him, Jane, always expecting too much. It's no wonder he felt he had to hide things from you, she huffed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like we were living in two different realities. Expecting too much? I'm working day and night to keep us going, and he— Enough, Jane. I won't hear another word against my son. You've made your bed, now lie in it, she interrupted, and with that she hung up, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust, respect, and the realization that maybe, just maybe, I was in this fight all alone. Life had thrown its fair share of curveballs, but nothing hit harder than the day Lily fell sick. It wasn't just a sniffle or a cough. It was one of those moments that stops you dead in your tracks, forcing you to reassess everything. Lily's fever had spiked in the night, her little body racked with coughs that seemed to shake the very bed she lay in. I remember sitting beside her, a cool cloth in hand, trying to bring some relief. The next morning, with Lily still burning up, I knew we needed a doctor. Alex was sprawled on the couch, a can of beer already in hand. It was barely 9 a.m. Alex, Lily's sick, really sick. I need to take her to the doctor, I said, my voice strained with worry. He glanced up, irritation flashing across his face. So take her. What do you want me to do about it? I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream. Maybe act like a father. I can't do everything alone, Alex. He didn't answer, just turned his attention back to his phone, effectively ending the conversation. At the doctor's office, the news wasn't good. Lily needed medicine, maybe even a specialist. The cost started to pile up in my head, a mountain of expenses we were ill-prepared to handle. I called Alex from the pharmacy, hoping for some semblance of support. The medicine's expensive, Alex, and she might need more tests. We need to figure this out. There was a pause before he spoke, his voice cold. Well, what do you want me to do about it, Jane? Money doesn't grow on trees. I was stunned into silence. Our daughter was sick, and all he could think about was money. She's your daughter, Alex. She needs us. Can't you see that? Of course I see that, but freaking out about it isn't going to make money appear. You figure it out, you're good at that, he retorted before hanging up. I felt a mix of anger, frustration, and sheer determination. Lily needed me, and I wasn't about to let her down. The decision to not send money to Alex's mom that month was a tough one, but necessary. Lily's health came first, no matter what. But when Mrs. Thompson found out, the fury was unleashed. "Where's my money, Jane?" she demanded over the phone, her voice a sharp knife. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. Lily's sick. The money went to her medicine and doctor's visits. We had no choice. No choice? That's my money, Jane. You can't just decide not to send it. What am I supposed to do? She accused. Your granddaughter is sick, Mrs. Thompson. Doesn't that matter to you? Lily's health is more important right now, I pleaded. She scoffed, a sound that made my skin crawl. You're just using that as an excuse. I need that money, Jane. You're being selfish. The conversation went downhill from there, ending with her calling me names and hanging up. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling a cocktail of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, disbelief, but above all, a fierce protectiveness over Lily. The day everything turned on its head started like any other, but ended in a way I never could have predicted. It was when I stood at the checkout line, groceries piled up, that I reached for my bank card and found nothing but emptiness. Panic knotted my stomach, not just at the embarrassment of not being able to pay, but at the realization of what it meant. Alex had taken my card for a whole week. My calls to him went unanswered, a silence that spoke volumes. Then, out of the blue, he returned, but not alone. His mother was in tow, both of them wearing smug looks that didn't bode well. Before I could even demand answers, Alex dropped his bombshell. I won, Jane. $5 million. Can you believe it? The news knocked the wind out of me. Not just the amount, but the sheer audacity of him claiming this victory after everything. What? How? I managed to ask. With your card, he said, as if he had done something clever. Bought a lottery ticket. The room spun. He used my card without permission, and now this. His next words cut deeper than the betrayal of theft. I'm leaving you, Jane. This is my chance to start over without you dragging me down. Me and Mom, we're set. His mother, standing there with that twisted grin, twisted the knife. Told you, Jane. You never believed in my son. Now look at you, left behind while we move on to better things. I was speechless. The injustice of it all burned in my chest. You think you can just take that money and run? That's my card, my account. You stole from me, Alex. He shrugged, that infuriating indifference back in full force. Finders keepers, Jane. I won fair and square. It's time I found someone more supportive, someone who appreciates me. The words stung, but it was the dismissal of our life together, of our daughter, that hurt most. And what about Lily? You're abandoning your daughter. Lily will be fine with you. I need a fresh start, away from all this. He gestured vaguely around our home, as if it were a trap he had finally escaped. I wasn't just going to roll over and let him take everything from us. Especially not with money that was as much mine as it was his, if not more so. The first step was finding a lawyer, someone who could navigate the treacherous waters of legal battles that lay ahead. When I sat down across from Miss Rivera, a sharp woman with a reputation for being a bulldog in court, I knew I had found my champion. I'm not going to lie to you, Jane. This is going to be a tough fight, Miss Rivera began, her voice matter-of-fact. But it's not insurmountable. I nodded, clenching my fists in my lap to stop them from shaking. I understand, but I can't just let him get away with this. It's not right. She smiled, and there was a glint of something fierce in her eyes. I like your spirit. We'll give it everything we've got. First, we'll need to prove the purchase was made with your card. Do you have statements or any evidence of the transaction? Of course, I replied, pulling out copies of my bank statements I had brought with me. It's all here, the date, the time, the exact amount. Good, Miss Rivera said, taking the papers and scanning them quickly. This is a solid start. Next, we'll file for an injunction to freeze the winnings until the court makes a decision. It's going to make him and his mother very unhappy, but it's a necessary step. The thought of facing Alex and his mother again made my stomach churn, but the fire Miss Rivera had ignited in me burned brighter. Let them be unhappy. After everything they've done, it's the least they deserve. The day we served Alex with the papers, I saw him for the first time since he left. He looked different, harder, colder. His mother was with him, of course, her sneer as pronounced as ever. This is a mistake, Jane. You're going to lose, Alex said, his voice laced with a venom I hadn't heard before. I'm not the one who made a mistake, I shot back, my voice steady despite the trembling I felt inside. Stealing from your family, abandoning your daughter, that was all you. His mother stepped forward, her finger wagging in my face. You're a greedy, ungrateful little— Enough, Miss Rivera interjected, stepping between us with a calm authority that immediately silenced Alex's mother. This will be settled in court, not on your doorstep. After months of legal wrangling, the day of reconing finally arrived. I sat in the courtroom, a bundle of nerves, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Across the room, Alex and his mother sat together, an air of smug confidence about them that made my skin crawl. They whispered to each other, casting occasional glances my way, their expressions a mix of disdain and superiority. My lawyer leaned over, her voice a whisper of steel. Ready for this, Jane? It's showtime. I nodded, not trusting my voice. My heart hammered in my chest, a loud echo in the silent room as we awaited the judge's entrance. When the judge finally entered, the room hushed to a solemn quiet, and the proceedings began, a blur of legal jargon and back and forth that felt both endless and fleeting. Alex's lawyer painted him as a wronged man, desperately trying to claw back some dignity from a life derailed. It was almost laughable if it wasn't so tragic. Then Miss Rivera stood, clearing her throat. Your Honor, let's not forget the facts. The lottery ticket, the source of this windfall, was purchased with stolen funds, my client's funds. This isn't a fairy tale windfall. It's the result of deceit, a betrayal of familial trust. The back and forth continued until the judge finally called for silence, ready to deliver the verdict. See? My heart stopped, every second stretching into eternity as we awaited his words. In light of the evidence presented, it is the decision of this court that the majority of the lottery winnings, being the result of a transaction made with funds not belonging to Mr. Alex Thompson, be awarded to Mrs. Jane Thompson, the judge announced, his voice carrying a weight that felt like a gavel to my soul. A wave of relief washed over me, so intense it left me dizzy. Beside me, Miss Rivera squeezed my hand, a victorious smile on her face. Across the room, Alex's face was a picture of shock, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. His mother's reaction was more vocal, a strangled gasp of indignation that echoed off the courtroom walls. "This is robbery, pure and simple," she exclaimed, her voice shrill with disbelief. But her protests fell on deaf ears, the judge already moving on to finalize the proceedings. Months had rolled by since the dust settled on the courtroom floor, leaving me with a significant chunk of the winnings and a fresh start. I didn't waste any time dwelling on what could have been. Instead, I focused on the future, investing wisely in shares of a reputable company and securing a nest egg for Lily's education. She was going to have the opportunities I fought tooth and nail for without the shadow of her father's mistakes looming over her. As for Alex and his mother, well, their story took the kind of turn you'd expect when too much money meets too little sense. He bought himself an outrageously expensive car, flaunting it like a trophy whenever he got the chance. But the flash and dazzle couldn't mask the inevitable. His gambling, which started as a small-time hobby, spiraled out of control, swallowing every last penny of his windfall. Last I heard, he was drowning in debt, the fancy car long gone, and living off whatever his mother scraped together from her pension. Their grandiose dreams deflated to the size of their cramped living quarters in his mother's old house, the two of them constantly at each other's throats. Alex never did get a job, pride and laziness anchoring him to his mother's couch as firmly as if he were cemented there. One afternoon, while Lily and I were at the park enjoying a peaceful, simple moment, Sarah, my steadfast friend through thick and thin, sidled up beside me on the bench. "Jane, you heard about Alex?" she asked, a note of pity in her voice that I didn't need. I nodded, keeping my eyes on Lily as she laughed, swinging higher and higher. "Yeah, heard he's hit rock bottom." Sarah shook her head. "It's a damn shame, isn't it? All that money and nothing to show for it." I sighed, a small part of me still aching for the man I once loved, for the father Lily deserved but didn't have. "It is a shame, but we're moving on, Sarah. We're happy." Our conversation drifted to lighter topics, but as I sat there basking in the late afternoon sun, my thoughts briefly wandered to Alex. I wondered if he ever thought about us, about the life he threw away for a shot at easy money. But then Lily called out, beckoning me to push her higher on the swing, and just like that, my fleeting curiosity about Alex's regrets vanished into the air.
"I never expected my life to unravel over a post-it note. You know those small yellow squares people use for quick reminders? Yeah, one of those was about to turn my world upside down. My name is Jamie, and until last Tuesday, I thought I had it all figured out. Great career, loving husband, and the kind of life that made other people wonder how I managed to keep all the plates spinning. Spoiler alert, I didn't. I just returned from a 3-day business trip to Chicago, dragging my wheeled suitcase through our quiet house at 11 p.m. The lights were off, except for the dim glow of the kitchen under-cabinet lighting we always left on. That's when I saw it, a yellow square stuck to the refrigerator door. Need some time to think. Don't wait up. 8 words. That's all Ethan left me after 12 years together, 5 of them married. I stood there in my wrinkled blazer, still wearing my uncomfortable heels, staring at his handwriting until the letters started to blur. Ethan? I called out anyway, my voice echoing through our empty house. No response, of course. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. Hey, it's Ethan. Leave a message. Hey, just got home. Got your note. Call me when you can. I tried to keep my voice casual, like I wasn't standing in our dark kitchen at nearly midnight, talking to his voicemail while my stomach tied itself in knots. I kicked off my heels and walked through the house, flipping on lights as I went. Everything looked normal, almost too normal. His laptop was missing from his usual spot on the coffee table, but otherwise, there were no signs of. What? What was I even looking for? My phone buzzed, and I nearly dropped it in my rush to check the screen. But it was just a text from Helen, my mother-in-law. Hope you had a safe flight home, sweetheart. Lunch tomorrow. I stared at her message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Helen had been more of a mother to me than my own in the past few years. She'd know if something was wrong with Ethan, wouldn't she? Instead of replying, I walked upstairs to our bedroom. Ethan's side of the closet looked untouched, his suits hanging in their usual order. His dresser drawers were closed, his watch still on the nightstand. Everything seemed fine, except for the gnawing feeling in my gut that nothing was fine at all. I changed into one of his old t-shirts, a habit I'd picked up years ago, and sat on our bed, scrolling through my phone. No new messages from Ethan. No missed calls. Just that stupid yellow post-it note downstairs, mocking me with its vagueness. The last time I'd seen him was Sunday morning, before I left for my flight. We'd had coffee together, talked about his mother's upcoming doctor's appointment, made plans for the weekend. Everything had seemed normal. Hadn't it? But now that I thought about it, there had been something off in his smile when he kissed me goodbye. A hesitation in his hug that I'd brushed off as early morning sluggishness. The way he'd lingered in the doorway watching me load my suitcase into the Uber. My phone buzzed again, another text from Helen. Ethan mentioned he might be working late this week. Everything okay? I felt my chest tighten. Working late? Since when did Ethan work late? As an IT consultant, he usually kept regular hours, often working from home. Something wasn't adding up. I typed back quickly, just got home. Everything's fine. Lunch tomorrow sounds great. But as I lay there in our too-empty bed, staring at the ceiling fan slowly spinning above me, I knew I was lying. Nothing was fine. That little yellow post-it note was just the beginning, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew our life together was about to change forever. I just didn't know how much. The hospital corridor smelled like artificial lemons and broken promises. I'd come straight from work to visit Helen, still wearing my power suit like some kind of corporate armor. The text from the hospital had arrived during my morning meeting. Helen had been admitted after a bad fall. Jamie, sweetheart. Helen's face lit up as I entered her room, though I could see the pain behind her smile. She was propped up against stark white pillows, looking smaller than usual in the hospital bed. You didn't have to rush over. Of course I did. I leaned down to hug her, careful of the 4 in her arm. Have you heard from Ethan? I tried calling him. A flicker of something, confusion. Concern. Crossed Helen's face. He stopped by briefly this morning. Said he had some work emergency. She paused, studying my face. Is everything all right between you two? I busied myself arranging the flowers I'd brought, buying time to steady my voice. Why do you ask? Mother's intuition, maybe. Helen reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. He seems distracted lately. Not himself. He left me a note last night, I admitted, sinking into the visitor's chair. Said he needed time to think. Hasn't been home since. Helen's monitor beeped steadily in the background as she processed this. That doesn't sound like my son. No, I agreed. It doesn't. My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan, sorry about last night. Crazy work situation. Talk soon. I showed Helen the message. She frowned, her fingers tightening around mine. Jamie, there's something. The door opened, and a nurse walked in with Helen's medication. The moment shattered like glass, whatever Helen had been about to say lost in the routine of vital signs and pill cups. Mrs. Lark, how's your pain level? The nurse asked, checking Helen's chart. Oh, manageable, Helen said, but I saw her wince as she shifted position. Though I wouldn't say no to something stronger. While the nurse adjusted Helen's medication, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Greg. Hey, you guys free for dinner Friday? Megan's making her famous lasagna. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Greg and Megan had been our friends since college, but the thought of pretending everything was normal made my stomach churn. Who's that? Helen asked after the nurse left. Greg. Dinner invitation. Go, Helen insisted. You need to get out, not sit here watching me sleep. Besides. She paused, that same strange look crossing her face. Maybe Ethan will actually show up for that. Before I could respond, my phone rang, work calling. I stepped into the hallway to take it, watching through the window as Helen closed her eyes. Her face tight with pain that had nothing to do with her fall. When I returned, Helen was holding a small photo album I recognized from her bedside table at home. Look what Ethan brought this morning, she said, patting the bed beside her. Come see. I sat on the edge of her bed, and she opened the album. There we were, Ethan and me on our wedding day, both of us laughing at something off camera. I remembered that moment. Greg had tripped over his own feet trying to take the picture. You know what I see when I look at this? Helen asked softly. I see my son looking at you like you're his whole world. Helen. Let me finish. She turned the page. Another photo, this one from Christmas last year. Ethan and I in matching ugly sweaters, his arm around my waist. Something's wrong, isn't it? Something more than just a note. I stared at the photo, at our smiling faces, trying to pinpoint when things had started to change. I don't know, I admitted. But I'm going to find out. Helen closed the album, her hands trembling slightly. Jamie, there's something you should know about. Her monitor suddenly erupted in sharp beeps. Helen's face went pale, her hand clutching her chest. I lunged for the call button as she gasped for breath. Help! I shouted into the hallway. I need help in here. As medical staff rushed in, I was pushed aside, forced to watch helplessly as they worked on Helen. My phone buzzed again, another text from Ethan. But this one wasn't meant for me. Megan's lasagna sat untouched on my plate as I watched Ethan check his phone for the 1000th time that evening. We were at Greg and Megan's house for our usual Friday dinner, but nothing about this felt usual. Sorry, Ethan muttered, sliding his phone back into his pocket. Work stuff. On a Friday night? Greg raised an eyebrow. Man, they're working you too hard. I took a sip of wine, remembering the text I'd glimpsed on Ethan's phone at the hospital. The one that wasn't meant for me, miss you already. Can't wait until Friday. Jamie, how's Helen doing? Megan asked, refilling my glass without waiting for an answer. Her hand trembled slightly, spilling a few drops of red wine on the white tablecloth. Stable, I said, watching Megan dab at the stain with her napkin. The doctors say she can probably go home next week. That's great news. Greg smiled. We should all visit her this weekend. Ethan's phone buzzed again. He pushed back from the table. Sorry, I need to take this. As he walked onto the back porch, I noticed Megan's eyes following him. She quickly looked away when she caught me watching. So, Greg said, clearly trying to fill the awkward silence, anyone want dessert? Megan made tiramisu. I'll help you get it, Megan offered, practically jumping from her chair. Through the glass doors, I could see Ethan pacing, running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was stressed. His face was illuminated by his phone screen, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of his expression, not stressed, but smiling. "Jamie?" Greg's voice snapped me back. "You okay?" "Yeah, just." I gestured vaguely at my barely touched lasagna. "Not very hungry." In the kitchen, I heard a glass shatter, followed by Megan's muffled curse. Greg rushed to help her, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the view of my husband having what was clearly not a work call. My phone buzzed, a text from Helen: "Doctors say I can have visitors tomorrow. Will you come? Bring Ethan if you can find him." The sliding door opened, and Ethan returned, slipping his phone away with that same secret smile. "Sorry about that. Where's dessert?" "Megan dropped something," I said, studying his face. "Everything okay with work?" "Yeah, just a server issue." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Nothing major." Greg and Megan returned with the tiramisu, but Megan's eyes were red, and she'd changed her blouse. "Everything okay in there?" I asked. "Fine." Megan's voice was too bright. "Just clumsy me, breaking things." As Greg served dessert, I watched the way Megan's hands shook, the way Ethan kept checking his phone under the table. The way neither of them would look directly at anyone else. "Actually," I said, standing up, "I should probably go. Helen texted about visiting tomorrow, and I need to review some work documents tonight." "I'll stay and help clean up," Ethan said quickly. "Too quickly." "No," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You should come home. We need to talk." The room went silent. Greg looked between us, confusion clear on his face. Megan suddenly became very interested in her dessert. "Can it wait?" Ethan asked. I promised Greg I'd help him with his new gaming setup. "Did you?" I turned to Greg. "Did he promise that?" Greg shifted uncomfortably. We hadn't really." "Right." I grabbed my purse. "Thanks for dinner, Megan." The lasagna was delicious. "Jamie, wait," Ethan started. "No." I cut him off. "Either come home now, or don't come home at all. Your choice." I walked out before anyone could respond, but through the front window, I saw Megan grab Ethan's arm, shaking her head slightly. He pulled away, but didn't follow me. In my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, watching the house. The text from the hospital was still open on my phone: "Miss you already. Can't wait until Friday." Friday. Dinner at Greg and Megan's. My hands stopped shaking as a strange calm settled over me. Now I knew. Now I could plan. Helen had tried to warn me, I realized. Before her attack, she'd been about to tell me something. Something about her son, and possibly about the woman I'd thought was my friend. Well, they wanted to play games. Fine. Game on. Ethan didn't come home that night. Or the next. Our house felt like a museum of someone else's life, photos on walls, mixed up coffee mugs in the cabinet, his shoes still by the door. I spent Saturday morning in my home office, pretending to work while actually scrolling through months of phone records. The hospital called around noon. "Jamie?" Helen's voice was weak. "Could you bring my gray cardigan from home? The one with the pearl buttons?" "Of course." I was already grabbing my keys. "How are you feeling?" "Better now that I've seen Greg." There was a pause. "He stopped by this morning." "Alone?" My hand froze on the doorknob. "Greg came to see you." "He seemed worried. Asked some strange questions about you and Ethan." I found Helen's cardigan in her bedroom closet, neatly hung next to other cardigans that all looked exactly the same to me. As I reached for it, something fell from the pocket, a small, leather-bound notebook. "Jamie?" Helen was still on the line. Are you there? Yeah, sorry. Just found your sweater. I picked up the notebook, recognizing Helen's careful handwriting. I'll be there soon. I hung up and opened the notebook. The first page was dated 3 months ago. Ethan came by today. Something's wrong, he's not himself. Mentioned trouble at work, but I know my son. This is different. When I asked about Jamie, he changed the subject. Megan dropped by later, asking about him. Said Greg was worried too. But the way she asked. My phone buzzed, a text from Greg, "Can we talk? Alone?" I stared at the message, then back at Helen's notebook. The next entry was from 2 weeks ago. Saw them together at Carlton's cafe. They didn't see me. Ethan was holding her hand across the table. My heart breaks for Jamie. Should I tell her? Would she believe me? Another text from Greg, "Please. It's important." I texted back, "Coffee shop on 5th. 30 minutes. Greg was already there when I arrived, fidgeting with a paper napkin. He looked like he hadn't slept. "I need to tell you something," he said as I sat down. "About Megan. And Ethan." "I know." He blinked. "You do." "Not everything." I placed Helen's notebook on the table. "But enough." Greg stared at the notebook, then pushed his coffee aside. "Last night, after you left," Megan confessed. "They've been." He couldn't finish. "How long?" 6 months. His voice cracked. "She says it's over, but the texts are still coming," I finished. "The secret meetings. The lies." He nodded, looking destroyed. I found hotel receipts. Credit card statements. They were together when Helen had her attack. My coffee turned to acid in my stomach. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." Greg met my eyes. "What are we going to do?" Before I could answer, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number, "Back off. You don't want this fight." I showed it to Greg. His face hardened. "That's Megan's work phone," he said. "She thinks I don't know about it." Another text, "Some things are better left alone. For Helen's sake." My hands started shaking, not from fear, but rage. They were threatening Helen now. "Greg," I said, my voice deadly calm, "how good are you still with computers?" "Good enough." "Why?" I showed him the threatening texts. "Because I think it's time we stop playing defense." He studied my face for a moment, then pulled out his laptop. "What do you need?" "Everything. Bank records, emails, phone logs. Especially from their work accounts." I took Helen's notebook back, clutching it like a weapon. "They want to play dirty. Let's show them what dirty really looks like." As Greg started typing, my phone buzzed one more time. A message from Helen. "The doctors found something on my latest scan. We need to talk. Soon." I looked at Greg, then at the notebook, then at the threatening texts. Time was running out, and I had to choose: protect Helen, expose the truth, or take revenge. Maybe, with the right plan, I could do all three. The doctor's words hung in the air like smoke: stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Helen sat in her hospital bed, calm as ever. While I felt the room spin around me. "How long have you known?" I managed to ask. "A few weeks." Helen reached for my hand. "I didn't want to add to your troubles." My phone buzzed, another work email about the upcoming Thanksgiving conference in New York. I was supposed to give the keynote speech, a career-defining moment. The timing couldn't have been worse. "Does Ethan know?" Helen's silence was answer enough. She hadn't told him, and he hadn't been around to notice. "I'll cancel my trip," I said. "The conference can find another speaker." "Absolutely not." Helen's grip tightened. "I won't have you sacrificing your career." Ethan can take care of me. I almost laughed at that. Ethan, who hadn't been home in days. Ethan, who was too busy with Megan to visit his own mother in the hospital. My phone buzzed again. Greg this time found something in their emails. You need to see this. Jamie? Helen's voice pulled me back. There's something else you should know. Before she could continue, Ethan walked in. He looked surprised to see me, like he'd been hoping to avoid exactly this scenario. Mom, he said, barely glancing my way. How are you feeling? Like I have cancer, Helen replied dryly. But you'd know that if you'd been here when the doctors explained everything. Ethan flinched. I've been busy with work? I finished for him. Strange, since Greg mentioned your company's been on holiday schedule this week. The tension in the room could have powered a small city. Ethan's phone chimed, that familiar sound that made my stomach turn. You should get that, I said. Might be important. Helen watched this exchange with knowing eyes. Ethan, why don't you get me some water? Once he left, Helen pulled something from under her pillow, an envelope. I wrote this weeks ago, when I first suspected. Everything. Don't open it yet. Wait until after Thanksgiving. Helen. Promise me. Her voice was steel. And promise you'll go to that conference. I have my reasons. My phone lit up with Greg's messages. Email trail shows hotel bookings. Financial transfers. They're planning something over Thanksgiving. Ethan returned with the water, and his phone chimed again. This time, I caught a glimpse of the screen. Everything's arranged for next week. Once she's in New York. The pieces clicked together like a terrible puzzle. They were waiting for me to leave town. Planning something while I was gone. I should go, I said, standing. Need to prepare for the conference. You're still going? Ethan asked too quickly. Of course. I smiled, channeling every business negotiation I'd ever conducted. It's important for my career. You'll take care of Helen, right? He nodded, relief visible on his face. Of course. I hugged Helen goodbye, feeling the envelope crinkle between us. I'll see you after Thanksgiving. In the hallway, I texted Greg, need a favor. How good are you at accessing security cameras? His response was immediate, already on it. What's the plan? I looked back through the hospital room window. Helen was showing Ethan her notebook, the decoy one I'd planted earlier, not the real one in my purse. Ethan was falling for it, just like he'd fall for my apparent departure for New York. They think I'm leaving town, I wrote to Greg. Let's give them exactly what they want. Another text from Megan's burner phone arrived, smart choice about the conference. Some distances are better kept. I clutched Helen's envelope, my decision crystallizing. They thought they were setting a trap, but they just walked into mine. One more thing, I texted Greg. Book me a hotel room in New York. Make sure everyone knows about it. Let them think they had me figured out. Let them think I was running away. Thanksgiving was going to be interesting this year. The security footage from our house played on Greg's laptop, showing Ethan and Megan entering at 2 a.m. I watched from my rental car parked across the street, where I'd been since supposedly leaving for New York yesterday. They're in your bedroom, Greg's voice crackled through my earpiece. Want me to kill the feed? No. My voice sounded strange, even to me. Keep recording. My phone lit up with a text from Helen's nurse, Mrs. Lark asking for you. Says it's urgent. I gripped the steering wheel harder, torn between two betrayals unfolding simultaneously. The one in my bedroom and the one at the hospital, where Ethan hadn't visited Helen once since I'd left. Jamie, Greg warned, they're accessing your home office computer. Of course they were. The fake financial documents I'd left there would keep them busy. What they didn't know was that every keystroke was being logged, every file access recorded. Another text from Helen's nurse, doctor says her condition is deteriorating rapidly. Greg, I said, send me the hospital security feed. The split screen on my phone showed two scenes, my bedroom and Helen's hospital room. My husband and his lover rifling through my personal files while my mother-in-law lay alone, fighting for her life. Helen's envelope sat heavy in my jacket pocket, still unopened. Wait until after Thanksgiving, she'd said. But watching her now, alone in that hospital bed, I couldn't wait any longer. My hands shook as I opened it. My dearest Jamie. By now you know about Ethan and Megan. What you don't know is why I've been protecting them. The cancer isn't new, I've known for months. Ethan discovered something in the insurance paperwork. Something that could ruin everything. Your company's health insurance, which covers me as a dependent, has a clause about pre-existing conditions. If they discover I knew about the cancer before the policy took effect. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Helen had kept quiet about her diagnosis to protect my career, while Ethan and Megan had been using this information to. Movement in your office, Greg interrupted. They're accessing your work emails. On the hospital feed, Helen's monitors started beeping erratically. Medical staff rushed into her room. Jamie, Greg's voice was urgent, they're sending emails from your account. Something about insurance fraud. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. They weren't just having an affair, they were setting me up. Using Helen's condition to manufacture a fraud case against me. Once I was discredited and fired, Helen would lose her insurance coverage. My phone rang, the hospital's number. Mrs. Lark is asking for you, the nurse said. She's very agitated. The doctor says. In my bedroom, Ethan and Megan were celebrating, champagne in hand. My champagne. My bed. My life. The doctor says she may not make it through the night. I started the car, then stopped. If I went to the hospital, I'd lose the evidence I needed to stop them. If I stayed, I might lose Helen. Greg, I said, send everything to my lawyer. Everything. Already done. But Jamie, there's something else. Something in their emails about Helen's original diagnosis. The hospital feed showed Helen reaching for her phone, her hands shaking. My phone buzzed with her message. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I should have told you sooner. The insurance. It wasn't just about me. Check the dates on Ethan's first email to Megan. The day I got my diagnosis. The day your company announced your promotion. The day everything started falling apart. In my bedroom, Ethan raised his glass in a mock toast, unaware he was being recorded. Unaware that his mother was dying. Unaware that his carefully constructed plan was about to backfire. But as I sat there, watching both screens, I realized I couldn't win this one. Not completely. Whatever I chose, justice or mercy, revenge or protection, I would lose something precious. Helen's monitor flatlined. And I made my choice. I walked into my house exactly 36 minutes after Helen's heart stopped. The champagne bottle still sat empty on my bedroom floor, but Ethan and Megan had moved to the kitchen. I could hear their laughter floating up the stairs as I silently made my way to my office. My laptop was still open, emails drafted and ready to send that would destroy my career. Evidence of insurance fraud carefully constructed to look like I'd known about Helen's condition all along. Their perfect plan. I pressed send on my own email, the one containing every recorded minute of their betrayal, copied to the board of directors, HR, and Greg's lawyer. Then I walked downstairs. You're supposed to be in New York, Ethan said, freezing with a wine glass halfway to his lips. Megan dropped her phone, face draining of color. Helen's dead. My voice didn't shake. She died alone because her son was too busy trying to destroy his wife to visit his dying mother. Ethan's face went through a series of emotions, shock, grief, guilt, before settling on something harder. Jamie, whatever you think you know. I know everything. I pulled out my phone, playing the security footage of them in my office. Every email. Every meeting. Every plan to use Helen's illness to frame me for fraud. Megan stepped forward, hands raised. We can explain. Can you explain this? I played Helen's final voice message, the one she'd recorded just before her heart gave out. Her voice filled the kitchen. I'm sorry, Ethan. I told them everything. About the original diagnosis, about your plan with Megan. About the real insurance fraud, the one you committed 3 years ago. Ethan lunged for my phone, but I was ready. I stepped back, watching his face contort as his mother's confession continued. You used my illness twice, Helen's voice accused. Once to embezzle from your company, hiding the transactions under my medical bills. And now to frame Jamie when she got too close to discovering it. Turn it off, Ethan growled. Why? Afraid to hear how your mother spent her final hours making sure the truth came out. Megan grabbed her purse, heading for the door, but Greg was already there. He'd been waiting outside, and now he blocked the only exit. Going somewhere? He asked his wife. The board has everything, I said, watching Ethan's face as it all crumbled around him. The real fraud evidence. The affair. Helen's statement. They're probably reading it right now. Ethan's phone started ringing. Then Megan's. Then mine. You don't understand, Ethan pleaded, suddenly desperate. I did it for Mom. The insurance wouldn't cover her experimental treatments. So you stole the money, I finished. I would have helped you, Ethan. We could have found another way. And then what? He spat. Watch you play the hero while I remained the failing son. Watch my dying mother love you more than me. His words hung in the air, revealing the real betrayal, not just of our marriage, but of himself. My phone buzzed again, the hospital, asking about Helen's arrangements. In the end, she'd chosen me as her medical proxy, not Ethan. Her final act of trust. The police will be here soon, Greg said quietly. The board's filing charges. Megan started crying, but Ethan just stood there, staring at the phone still playing his mother's voice. His final message from her, and it was a testimony against him. I could have forgiven the affair, I said, turning to leave. But using your mother's death as a weapon? That's something Helen never forgave you for, and neither will I. Jamie, wait, Ethan called out, but I was already walking away. Outside, the November air was sharp with coming snow. My phone showed dozens of missed calls, the board, the police, the hospital. The next few hours would be chaos. But as I got in my car, I noticed one last unread message from Helen, sent moments before she died. Remember? Sweetheart, sometimes the best revenge is living well. I started the engine, leaving Ethan and Megan to face the consequences of their choices. Helen had taught me that justice and revenge aren't always the same thing. Sometimes they're better. 6 months after Helen's funeral, I stood in her garden, surrounded by the spring flowers she'd planted last fall. Her final gift, blooming in defiance of everything that had happened. The house sale was closing today. Ethan wouldn't be there, he couldn't be, given the conditions of his plea deal. The embezzlement charges had stuck, even if Megan had managed to avoid prosecution by turning state's evidence. Last box, Greg said, carrying a carefully wrapped photo album to my car. He'd been my rock through all of this, even as he navigated his own divorce from Megan. Found something you should see, he added, pulling an envelope from his pocket. It was hidden behind Helen's bedroom mirror. The envelope was dated 3 days before her death, addressed to me in her elegant handwriting. Inside was a key and a letter. My dearest Jamie. By the time you read this, you'll know everything. About Ethan's betrayal, about Megan, about the money. But there's one last thing you don't know, something I've kept hidden for 30 years. The key opens a safety deposit box at First National. What you find there might help you understand why I wasn't surprised by Ethan's actions. Some patterns repeat across generations, but you've shown me they can also be broken. You were the daughter I always wanted. Remember that. Love, Helen. My phone buzzed, a text from my lawyer. Ethan signed the divorce papers. It's done. I looked at the key in my hand, then at the blooming garden. Helen had known, not just about Ethan's recent betrayals, but about something deeper, older. Something she'd kept hidden until she was sure I was strong enough to handle it. Want company? Greg asked, noticing my expression. I shook my head. This one I need to do alone. The bank was quiet when I arrived. The safety deposit box contained a single manila envelope, thick with documents. On top was another note from Helen. The truth about Ethan's father, and why I never told anyone how he really died. My hands shook as I read the decades-old police reports, newspaper clippings, and Helen's private journals. The pattern she'd mentioned became clear, a history of financial fraud, betrayal, and secrets that had shaped both mother and son. But Helen had broken the cycle. She'd chosen truth over protection in the end, chosen justice over family loyalty. Chosen me. My phone buzzed again, work this time. The promotion I'd been worried about losing had turned into a CEO position at a competing firm. Life had a way of surprising you. As I drove home, I passed the street where Megan now lived alone, where Greg was rebuilding his life, where Ethan had lost everything. The revenge I'd wanted had come naturally, without me having to orchestrate it. Helen had taught me that too. Sometimes justice works best when you step back and let truth do its work. At home, I found one last surprise, a small package from Helen's lawyer. Inside was a set of garden tools and seeds, with a final note. For your new beginning. Some gardens grow better after a fire. I stood in my backyard, holding the seeds Helen had chosen for me months ago, planning for a future she wouldn't see but had helped create. The spring air was thick with possibility. My phone lit up with another text, an unknown number. For a moment, I tensed, remembering those threatening messages from months ago. But this was different. Thank you for the flowers on Mom's grave. You were a better child to her than I ever was. I didn't respond. Some conversations were better left in the past. Instead, I knelt in the soft earth and began to plant Helen's seeds, understanding finally what she'd meant about patterns and choices. About revenge and grace. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying what hurt you. Sometimes it's about growing something new in the ashes of what was lost. I dug my hands into the soil and began my new chapter, Helen's last lesson blooming around me like a garden after rain.
What? You've had the divorce papers ready this whole time? That's low, even for you, but it doesn't matter because I'm not afraid. Troy sat across from me in our cozy apartment, his eyes cold and unyielding. He always had a way of making everything feel like my fault. His voice dripped with smugness as he spoke. Casey, it's simple. You either quit your job and take care of my father, or we're done. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Troy, I can't just give up my life. I love my job and you already know that. Why can't we find another way to take care of Dan? His gaze hardened. You don't get it, do you? This is about family. My dad needs you, and you owe it to us to be there for him. I leaned back, the weight of his words pressing down on me. This was the man I married, the one I once thought I'd spend forever with. But now I was seeing the manipulative tactics right in front of me. No, Troy, I said firmly. I don't owe him my career. He scoffed, standing up and stepping closer. You wouldn't understand loyalty if it hit you in the face, Casey. Before I could retort, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Jenna, my older sister. Thinking of you. Call me if you need to talk. Perfect timing, as usual. Knowing that Jenna had my back gave me a small ounce of strength to stand my ground. I looked Troy in the eyes, taking a deep breath. You can't force me into this corner. This isn't how a marriage works. You say that, but look at where we are, Troy retorted. Dan's health is declining, and you don't even care. It's pathetic. I felt my hands clench into fists. I care about Dan, but I also care about my own life. I won't let you dictate my decisions. Troy shook his head, turning away. You'll regret this, Casey. Mark my words. Later that evening, Jenna came over. As soon as she walked in, she gave me a knowing look. He's pushing you again, isn't he? Yes, I admitted, sinking into the couch. This time, it's about quitting my job. He wants me to take care of Dan full-time. Jenna sat down next to me, her hand on my shoulder. You can't let him control you, Casey. You've worked too hard to get where you are. I sighed. I know, but it's not easy. Every step I take, he's there, pushing back. Listen, Jenna said firmly, don't lose yourself in this. If Troy really loved you, he wouldn't be making these demands. Her words struck a chord, a realization I had been avoiding for too long. You're right, I need to think about what's best for me too. We spent the rest of the evening talking, the reality of my situation sinking in deeper with every word exchanged. Jenna's unwavering support was the anchor I desperately needed. After she left, I sat in the living room, replaying the day's events in my mind. Troy had shown his true colors, and I knew I had to prepare for what was coming next. No matter how hard it would be, I couldn't let him win. The next Saturday came faster than I had hoped, and soon enough, Troy and I were pulling up to his parents' house. Stepping out of the car, I could feel the tension build in my shoulders. Jenna's words were still fresh in my mind, but this was a different battlefield. Casey, do try to smile, Troy said, unlocking the front door, his voice dripping with sarcasm. We don't need your attitude today. I followed him inside, biting back a retort. Dan greeted us in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. Troy, Casey, nice to see you both. His eyes bore into mine, a subtle challenge. We made our way to the dining table, Troy's mother bustling around the kitchen. The small talk was as strained as ever, with Troy playing the charming son. But as the meal progressed, Dan's real agenda began to surface. So Casey, Dan began, setting his fork down. How's work? Must be hard balancing everything with Troy and, well, potential future responsibilities. I forced a smile, swallowing my irritation. Work's been good, thank you. Busy but fulfilling. Dan nodded, a knowing glint in his eye. I see. You know, family is important. Troy's mother and I have always put family first, no matter the sacrifices. Troy shot me a glance, urging me to respond appropriately. I cleared my throat. I understand, Dan, and I care about family too, but sometimes it's okay to find a balance. Oh, balance, Dan chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. Sometimes that's just an excuse to avoid hard choices. The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Sometimes hard choices are necessary, I replied, keeping my voice steady, but they shouldn't require losing yourself in the process. Troy jumped in, clearly trying to steer the conversation. Casey's always been passionate about her work. Maybe she can find a way to balance both, Dad. Dan leaned back, giving Troy a nod. Sure, but passions can change, especially when love and duty call. Just a thought, Casey. The rest of the meal was spent in a blur of forced conversations and thinly veiled comments. By the time we left, my head was pounding from the effort of maintaining my composure. Once we were in the car, Troy's mask dropped. You just can't help yourself, can you? He spat, gripping the steering wheel tightly. My father was trying to have a conversation, and you just had to challenge him. I was standing up for myself, I shot back. You can't expect me to agree with everything blindly. You're so stubborn, Casey. This is why we're having problems. You don't respect my family. I let out a bitter laugh. Respect goes both ways, Troy, and I'm done being the one who always bends. The drive home was silent, the air thick with unspoken resentment. Inside my mind, Jenna's warning rang clear. Don't lose yourself. The cracks in our facade were widening, and I knew this was just the beginning. At home, I finally broke the silence. Troy, this isn't how a marriage should be. We need to figure something out. He didn't look at me as he headed to the bedroom, his voice cold. Figure it out yourself, Casey. I've done my part. Staring at the closed door, I realized Jenna was right. Troy and his father wouldn't stop until they had full control, and as I stood alone in the living room, I made a silent vow. I would fight back, no matter the cost. It was late on a Wednesday evening, and the living room felt like a battlefield as I faced Troy. I had just come home from work, barely managing to keep my composure after another intense meeting with my team. But it seemed Troy had other plans for tonight. You haven't actually considered quitting, have you? He started, his voice mocking. It's like you don't care about us or my father at all. I dropped my keys on the table, not ready to entertain another of his guilt trips. We had this conversation, Troy. My job is important to me. Besides, there are other ways to support your father. His eyes narrowed, the tension in the room thickening. Casey, let me make this clear. Either you quit your job and start being a proper daughter-in-law, or this marriage is over. I blinked, the weight of his ultimatum hitting me like a freight train. You can't be serious. You're choosing this moment to push me? He stepped closer, his tone menacing. I'm absolutely serious. It's time you pick your career or our family. I felt a surge of anger rising. Since when did being part of this family mean sacrificing everything I've worked for? You can't just demand that I give up my entire life. You're being selfish, Casey. My father's health is deteriorating and you're thinking about your career? He shook his head. You've changed. I crossed my arms, standing my ground. Maybe I have, but I'm not going to lose myself just to fit into your mold. He sneered, exasperation evident on his face. If you won't do this for my father, what guarantee do I have that you even care about this marriage? A bitter laugh escaped my lips. What marriage, Troy? The one where you lord every decision over me, where your father's opinions matter more than my own? That's not a marriage. It's control. The room fell silent, the walls closing in on us as the reality of our situation sank in. Troy's gaze softened, but only slightly. You have till the end of the month to decide, Casey. If you haven't quit by then, don't expect to find me here. I swallowed hard, unable to believe the person in front of me was the same man I once loved. He stormed off, slamming the bedroom door behind him, leaving me standing alone in the fallout. Later, I called Jenna, my fingers trembling as I dialed. She picked up quickly. Hey, Casey, everything okay? I took a deep breath. No, it's not. Troy gave me an ultimatum tonight. Quit my job or he's leaving. Oh, Casey? Jenna sighed. That's a terrible position to be in. What are you going to do? I paced the living room, trying to steady my thoughts. I don't know, Jenna, but I can't let him force me into this. I need to stand up for myself. Absolutely, you do, Jenna replied, her voice a firm anchor in the chaos. We'll figure it out together. You're not alone in this. After we hung up, I sat on the couch, my determination growing stronger by the minute. The next steps wouldn't be easy, but with Jenna by my side, I knew I'd find a way to reclaim my life. The lines had been drawn, and the battle was just beginning. The following weeks felt like a balancing act on a thin wire. I buried myself in work during the daytime, finding solace in my projects and the camaraderie of my colleagues. But the nights were a different story. Troy's silent treatment was a continuous reminder of the storm brewing overhead. One evening, after sending off a final project email, I made my way home, feeling a knot in my stomach. Stepping through the door, I could hear Troy on the phone in the next room. He was laughing, a sound that felt foreign in our current reality. Yeah, it should be finalized soon. Once it is, everything will be set. Troy's voice carried a confidence I hadn't heard in a while. My curiosity piqued, and I edged closer to the door, trying to pick up more. Don't worry, Dad, Troy continued. Once Casey is out of the picture, we'll have complete control over the finances and everything else. She won't know what hit her. My breath caught in my throat. What was he talking about? And then it hit me. Something was seriously wrong. I backed away quietly and waited until Troy hung up. When he emerged from the room, he barely looked at me. I'm going for a walk, I said, grabbing my coat. He just nodded, disinterested. As soon as I was outside, I dialed Jenna. We have a bigger problem than I thought, I said the moment she picked up. I overheard Troy on the phone with his dad. They're planning something, and it involves our finances. Calm down, Casey. What did you hear exactly? Jenna's voice was calm, yet urgent. They're planning to cut me out somehow. Troy mentioned finalizing something and gaining control once I'm out of the picture. Jenna, I need to find out what they're up to. All right, get home safely, and we'll figure this out together. First, check Troy's emails or any documents he might be hiding. We need proof. Back at home, I waited until Troy was asleep before starting my search. Navigating through his laptop, I stumbled upon an email chain that seemed suspicious. The heading read, Re-Financial Adjustments. Clicking through, my heart sank further with each line I read. Transactions, account details, highly confidential terms. It all pointed to Troy lying about his job promotion and covertly using my income to fund a joint account with Dan. With shaking hands, I printed out the emails. This was exactly the kind of evidence Jenna and I needed. As I gathered the papers, feelings of betrayal and anger fused into a resolve. The next morning, I met Jenna at a nearby coffee shop. "You won't believe what I found," I said, handing her the printed emails. Her eyes scanned the pages quickly. "This is unbelievable, Casey. They're clearly planning to cut you off financially and leave you with nothing. We need a plan." "I won't let them destroy everything we've built," I replied firmly. "We have to find more proof, something that directly ties them to this scheme." Jenna nodded. "We need to be smart about this. Let's gather as much evidence as we can and ensure it's irrefutable." Leaving the coffee shop, a sense of dread mingled with newfound determination. This was just the beginning, but I wouldn't back down. Troy and his father had underestimated me, and they were about to learn a hard lesson. With Jenna by my side, I was ready to take the fight to them. It was time to turn the tables, no matter what it took. Dinner at Troy's parents' house felt tense, like we were all actors in a badly written play. Dan sat at the head of the table, a smug look on his face, while Troy played the dutiful son. I felt like I was being scrutinized from all angles. As expected, Dan started with the subtle digs. "So, Casey, how's the job going? Must be quite demanding with everything else on your plate." I smiled politely, feeling the dagger in his words. "It's busy but rewarding, thank you for asking." Troy chimed in, his voice sickeningly sweet. "You know, Casey's been considering some changes, maybe spending more time with us, right, dear?" I forced myself to keep calm. "Nothing's been decided yet, Troy. I'm still weighing my options." Dan's eyes glinted with hidden menace. "I'm sure you'll make the right choice. Family should always come first." In the middle of the meal, I excused myself to go to the bathroom. The plan Jenna and I had cooked up was playing out in my mind. I pulled out my phone and turned on the recording app, slipping it into my purse before heading back to the dining room. My heart pounded with anticipation. When I sat back down, Dan leaned towards Troy, his voice dropping just low enough to think I wouldn't hear. "She's too stubborn, Troy. We need to tighten the reins, remind her who's in control." Troy nodded, his face a mask of concern. "I know, Dad, I'll handle it. She'll fall in line, just like always. We'll make sure of it." My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep a neutral expression. Jenna was right. We needed more than just suspicion. We needed undeniable proof. As dinner wrapped up, Dan placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Remember, Casey, we're all family here. Sometimes sacrifices need to be made for the greater good." I managed a tight smile, the weight of his touch disgusting me. "Of course, Dan, I understand." Once we were in the car driving home, Troy's false kindness disappeared. "You didn't have to be so cold tonight," he snapped. My father was trying to be nice. I didn't trust myself to respond without revealing my plan, so I stared out the window, keeping my silence. When we got home, Troy went straight to bed, leaving me alone to review the recording. In the quiet of the living room, I plugged my phone into my laptop and played back the recording. Hearing Dan's manipulation and Troy's compliance felt like a knife turning in my gut. The next day I met Jenna again. "Dana and Troy practically laid out their plans over dinner," I said, playing her the recording on my phone. Jenna's eyes widened as she listened. "This is it, Casey. This is the proof we need. Now we have to act smart. We can't let them find out that we know." I nodded. "We need to build a strong case, something they can't weasel out of." "Exactly," Jenna agreed. "Now's the time to gather everything and be meticulous. We only get one shot at this." Walking out of the coffee shop, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The tides were turning. For every lie and manipulation, Troy and Dan would pay. And as I gripped my purse tighter, I knew that I had just taken the first big step in reclaiming my life. There would be more battles ahead, but I was ready. The game had changed, and now I held the cards. A few evenings later, I sat in the living room, waiting for Troy to come home. The envelope containing the truth lay on the coffee table in front of me, daring me to turn this moment into a confrontation. The recording device in my purse was my secret weapon. The door creaked open, and Troy walked in, noticeably weary. "Casey," he greeted, a forced warmth in his voice. "Troy, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but stern. He narrowed his eyes, sensing the shift in my demeanor. "What about?" I reached for the envelope but kept my eyes on him. "About us. About what kind of marriage this really is." He scoffed. dropping his bag onto a chair. "I've been telling you that for weeks, Casey. Why the sudden urge to talk now?" I stood up, placing the envelope in his hands. "Open it." Troy looked skeptical but tore into the envelope. As he read the printed emails and transcripts, his face twisted into a mask of anger and disbelief. "Where did you get this?" "I found it, Troy. I know you've been lying about your promotion and using my income for your secret plans with Dan," I said, holding my ground. He stepped closer, trying to intimidate me. "You've been spying on me? How dare you?" "Yes, I have," I replied, unwavering. "And I've discovered what you and your father have been plotting all along. You can't gaslight me anymore." Troy's face flared red with rage. "This means nothing. No one will believe you over me. Let's see you try to use this against me." I took a deep breath, pulling out my phone. "I don't need to try. I've recorded everything, including your little chat with Dan during dinner." I played back the crucial part of the recording, watching as Troy's confidence melted into panic. He lunged at me, trying to grab the phone, but I was quicker. I stepped back, keeping it out of his reach. "This is who you are, Troy. This is the man I married," I stated, my voice cold and resolute. "You manipulated me, tried to control me, but it's over now." He was breathing heavily, struggling to regain control. "You think you're so smart, Casey. Doing this won't end well for you." I raised an eyebrow. "It's already over. I'll be leaving, and I'm taking this to a lawyer. You can explain to them and everyone else why you and your father felt the need to set me up." For a moment he looked like he might hit me, but then he deflated, the color draining from his face. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice trembling. "No, Troy. The mistake was thinking you could control and deceive me without any consequences," I replied, turning away from him. I took my keys, picked up my pre-packed bag, and walked out the door without looking back. This was the end of a painful chapter, but the beginning of my fight for justice and freedom. Driving to Jenna's, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I was taking control of my life, and with Jenna's support, I had the strength to face whatever came next. Arriving at Jenna's doorstep, I rang the bell. She opened the door, and the sight of my sister's reassuring smile brought tears to my eyes. "It's done," I whispered, feeling a wave of relief crash over me. Jenna said, hugging me tightly. "You did it, Casey. Now let's make sure he pays for everything." As we walked inside, I realized I was no longer alone in this fight. With the truth on my side and Jenna by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next. The battle had just begun, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. A week had passed since I confronted Troy. I had moved in with Jenna, and with her support, we planned our next steps meticulously. My lawyer had all the emails and recordings. The legal wheels were in motion. That morning, Jenna and I sat at her kitchen table, finalizing the details. "Casey, here are the divorce papers," she said, sliding them across the table. "All you have to do is sign." I picked up the pen, my hand shaking slightly. This was it, the final push to sever all ties with Troy. I took a deep breath and signed my name, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. "Good," Jenna nodded. "Now, we just need to ensure he gets these and understands he has no way out." I packed my belongings with Jenna's help, making sure I left nothing behind. We loaded everything into her car and drove to my former home. The plan was simple: deliver the divorce papers and recording, and then walk away for good. When we arrived, Troy's car was in the driveway. My heart pounded as I stepped out, clutching the envelope. I steeled myself, walking to the front door. Jenna followed, ready to support me if needed. I knocked, and after a tense moment, Troy opened the door. His face turned pale when he saw me. "Casey, what do you want?" "I'm here to finalize things," I replied, holding out the envelope. "Divorce papers? It's over about Troy." He took the envelope, his hands trembling. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said firmly. "Inside, you'll also find a copy of the recording and the emails. You cannot threaten or manipulate me anymore." Troy's facade crumbled. "Casey, please, we can talk about this. We can fix things." "There's nothing left to fix, Troy," I replied, my voice unwavering. "You broke this marriage with your deceit and manipulation. This is the end." For a moment, he looked desperate, his eyes searching for a way to regain control. But there was nothing left for him to grasp. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice cracking. "You'll end up alone." "I'd rather be alone than stay in a toxic relationship," I shot back. Goodbye, Troy. Turning on my heel, I walked away, Jenna matching my stride. We got back into the car, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It's done, I said quietly. Jenna reached over, squeezing my hand. You did the right thing, Casey. Now let's get you home. Back at Jenna's, we sat in her living room, a sense of relief mingling with the anticipation of what was to come. So what's next? Jenna asked gently. I start over, I replied, feeling the weight of the past weeks lift from my shoulders. I focus on my job, my life, and what makes me happy. I won't let Troy's actions define me anymore. Jenna smiled, her eyes filled with pride. You're stronger than you think, Casey, and remember, you're not alone in this. Thanks, Jenna, for everything, I said, hugging her tightly. I couldn't have done this without you. That's what sisters are for, she replied, holding me close. As we settled in for the evening, a sense of calm washed over me. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like it was mine to shape and control. And with Jenna by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. The fight was far from over, but I was ready. Starting now, I would rebuild my life on my terms, free from manipulation and deceit.